Bob Sapp was one of the first true freak show crossovers from bodybuilding and strength into combat sports. A massive figure at over 350 pounds of muscle, Sapp's presence alone was enough to terrify opponents before the fight even began. He entered the Japanese K1 kickboxing circuit in the early 2000s and instantly became a sensation. Audiences were drawn to his cartoonish size, booming personality, and willingness to fight anyone on short notice. At his peak, Sapp even defeated legends like Ernesto Hoost, showing that brute size and power could sometimes overwhelm technique. But his fighting career quickly exposed the limitations of pure mass. Sapp developed a reputation for quitting under pressure. Once hit cleanly or forced to endure extended exchanges, he often turtled or turned away, leading to accusations that he was cashing paychecks rather than competing seriously. His MMA run followed the same pattern: explosive openings but quick collapses when opponents weathered the storm. Despite this, he carved out a global reputation as the Beast, a cautionary tale of how bodybuilding strength and intimidation do not translate to fighting skill. Mariusz Pudzianowski is often remembered as the world's most dominant strongman, but he also attempted to transition into fighting. Known as Pudzian, he won the world's strongest man title 5 times, combining raw power with a physique closer to a bodybuilder than the typical strongman. His background made him an intimidating figure when he entered mixed martial arts in 2009. Fans expected that his legendary strength and endurance from pulling trucks and lifting cars would transfer directly into combat sports. Pudzianowski's MMA career began with explosive hype. He debuted in Poland's KSW promotion, drawing massive crowds and pay-per-view numbers. Early fights showed his power. He bulldozed opponents with tackles and wild punches, relying on raw force rather than refined technique. However, the flaws in this approach quickly surfaced. Against skilled fighters, his lack of grappling fundamentals, striking accuracy, and energy management became obvious. Muscles that looked invincible in strongman contests fatigued quickly under the demands of clinching, wrestling, and ground fighting. Over time, he improved, learning takedown defense and boxing basics. His career became a mix of big wins against limited opponents and tough losses against elite fighters. Pudzianowski's journey highlighted how even world-class strength does not guarantee dominance in fighting. Martin Ford, nicknamed the Nightmare, built a reputation as one of the most intimidating physiques in bodybuilding and fitness. Standing at 6 feet 8 inches and weighing over 300 pounds of lean muscle, his appearance alone generated fear and hype. He marketed himself as a future MMA powerhouse, with media coverage dubbing him the scariest man on the planet. Promoters played heavily on his size, tattoos, and intense image, presenting him as a monster who would destroy anyone inside the cage. In reality, Ford's fighting career never truly materialized. Despite signing with major organizations like KSW, his highly publicized debut fights were repeatedly delayed or canceled. Promotional videos and training clips circulated widely, but they showed little actual combat ability, mostly fitness drills, bag work, or staged sparring. Critics began labeling him as more of a marketing product than a genuine fighter. When footage did surface, it suggested Ford lacked the coordination, striking technique, and stamina required at even a moderate professional level. His reputation remains tied to hype rather than results. Ford serves as an example of how a terrifying physique and promotion can generate global attention, but without actual fight performances, the image collapses under scrutiny. Rich Piana became one of bodybuilding's most recognizable figures, not only for his enormous size, but also for his outspoken personality and chaotic lifestyle. Unlike others on this list, Piana never pursued a formal fight career in MMA or boxing, but stories of his altercations in gyms, streets, and expos became part of his legend. His sheer mass, often weighing over 280 pounds with heavily tattooed arms and shoulders, gave him a menacing look that made people assume he could dominate in a fight. Piana himself often leaned into this image, posting videos and sharing stories about confrontations. He was known to aggressively confront hecklers, critics, or anyone he believed disrespected him. Clips of him squaring up in public settings went viral, reinforcing the idea that he lived as both a bodybuilder and a fighter. However, when analyzed, his fighting was more posturing and intimidation than technical skill. He relied on his presence and willingness to escalate situations rather than actual combat training. Rich Piana's case demonstrates how bodybuilding size can create the illusion of fighting ability. While he thrived on controversy and confrontation, there was no evidence of professional fighting skill, only a persona built on fear and bravado. Callum von Moger, often referred to as the modern-day Arnold, rose to fame for his classic bodybuilding look and social media presence. While celebrated for his physique, his personal life became marked by reckless decisions and public altercations. Unlike professional fighters, Callum never trained extensively in martial arts, but his reputation for brawls grew as he became involved in fights outside the gym and in the streets. One of the most infamous incidents occurred in 2019, when footage circulated of Callum in a violent clash outside a bar. The fight highlighted the dangers of mixing size, alcohol, and and ego. Instead of showcasing skill or control, Callum's actions appeared chaotic and dangerous, with his mass working against him as much as for him. His lack of technique exposed him, reinforcing the idea that bodybuilding aesthetics do not equate to fighting ability. These altercations, combined with substance abuse and a downward spiral in his personal life, tarnished his image. What was once a promising bodybuilding career became overshadowed by controversies and fights that showcased poor judgment. Callum von Moger represents how delusion and ego can push bodybuilders into violent scenarios where size alone is not enough. Greg Kovach was once billed as the largest professional bodybuilder in the world, standing 6 feet 4 inches and weighing over 400 pounds in his prime. His sheer size made him a spectacle in bodybuilding circles. Fans and even promoters sometimes suggested that someone of his mass could dominate in a fight simply by overwhelming opponents with brute force. Kovach himself cultivated an image of intimidation, often speaking confidently about his strength and physical dominance. In practice, however, his size proved to be more of a limitation than an advantage in any sort of combat setting. Stories circulated within gyms and expos of Kovach getting into confrontations, but rather than demonstrating effective fighting skill, these moments highlighted poor mobility and lack of conditioning. His enormous frame, while impressive on stage, was a hindrance when speed, endurance, and coordination were required. Kovach never pursued a professional fight career, but his reputation as a monster in bodybuilding circles kept the myth alive that he could dominate physically outside of competition. His story illustrates how bodybuilding mass creates an illusion of invincibility, an illusion quickly shattered in real-world confrontations where technique, stamina, and agility matter far more than sheer size. Victor Richards was one of the most controversial mass monsters in bodybuilding history. In the late 1980s and 1990s, he gained attention for being one of the heaviest bodybuilders of his era, often weighing over 330 pounds while still maintaining a striking physique. His sheer size and powerful appearance led many fans to assume that he could easily dominate in a fight. Richards himself occasionally fueled this belief with bold claims about his strength, toughness, and ability to handle himself outside the gym. Despite this image, there is little evidence that Richards had any real combat training or experience. Stories about him often revolved around his imposing presence and the intimidation factor he carried, not actual fighting ability. While there were rumors of him getting into physical altercations, nothing suggested he possessed the conditioning, technique, or discipline to transition into legitimate fighting. His reputation was built more on mystique than substance. Victor Richards serves as another example of how bodybuilding size often leads to delusions, both among fans and the athletes themselves, that muscles automatically translate to fighting skill. In reality, his legacy is tied to mass and controversy, not combat effectiveness. Joey Swole became known in the fitness industry not only for his bodybuilding physique, but also for his outspoken personality and confrontational style. With a massive, muscular build and a brash presence online, he projected the image of someone ready to step into any fight. Early in his career, Joey was often involved in gym disputes and verbal altercations, which reinforced his tough guy persona. This led many to believe he could back up his size with actual combat ability. However, Joey's reputation for fighting was more about intimidation and social media bravado than real combat skill. While he frequently posted about respect, discipline, and standing up for oneself, there is no record of him competing in organized fighting or having formal martial arts training. Incidents where he was rumored to square up with others often fizzled out, showing more posturing than technique. In recent years, Joey has shifted his image dramatically, becoming an advocate for gym positivity and calling out toxic behavior in fitness spaces. His transformation highlights the contrast between his earlier, fight-ready persona and his current role as a motivational figure. Joey Swole's case proves how bodybuilding physiques can create a false aura of fighting ability that doesn't hold up under scrutiny. Lee Priest, the outspoken Australian bodybuilder, built a reputation not just for his incredible physique, but also for his fiery temper and willingness to confront anyone who challenged him. Standing just 5 feet 4 inches, he was one of the shorter men in bodybuilding, yet his aggressive personality and muscular build made him seem larger than life. Stories of Priest getting into heated arguments at gyms, expos, and even in public fueled the perception that he was always ready for a fight. Unlike some bodybuilders who leaned only on intimidation, Lee Priest openly admitted to having scuffles outside of competition. He often portrayed himself as someone who wouldn't back down, regardless of his size disadvantage. This earned him a cult-like following among fans who admired his fearless attitude. However, despite his confidence and fiery persona, there was no evidence that Priest had serious fighting training. His approach leaned on aggression and toughness rather than skill or discipline. Priest's legacy in this context shows how confidence and attitude can amplify the illusion of fighting prowess. Though celebrated for standing up to bigger men and speaking his mind, his reputation as a fighter was rooted more in personality than proven combat ability. Mohamed Benaziza, a top professional bodybuilder from Algeria, earned the nickname Killer of Giants for defeating larger competitors on stage. Though not enormous in height, his dense muscle and aggressive presence gave him an aura of toughness that extended beyond bodybuilding. Among fans and peers, stories circulated that he believed his strength and conditioning could translate into fighting ability if tested. His confidence, combined with his powerful build, made many assume he could dominate in a physical confrontation. However, like many bodybuilders, Benaziza had no formal fight training. The assumption that his compact, muscular frame made him a natural fighter was more illusion than reality. Unlike athletes in combat sports, he never trained for stamina, striking, or grappling. Instead, his discipline was focused on size, symmetry, and stage performance. His reputation as someone who might handle himself in a fight rested more on perception than evidence. Tragically, Benaziza's life was cut short at only 33 years old, after he died suddenly following a competition in 1992. His story underscores the risks bodybuilders faced in the extreme pursuit of mass and conditioning, and how myths about fighting ability often surrounded physiques built for appearance rather than combat. Andreas Münzer was known in bodybuilding as the ultimate example of extreme conditioning. An Austrian competitor, he achieved unprecedented levels of muscle definition and striations, often stepping on stage with body fat levels close to zero. His shredded look gave him a fearsome, almost inhuman presence that led some fans to assume he was as dangerous in a fight as he was intimidating in appearance. In reality, Münzer had no history of combat training or fighting. His body was built for aesthetics and stage performance, not for endurance, striking, or grappling. In fact, the extreme dieting, dehydration, and drug use required to achieve his physique made him physically fragile rather than fight-ready. His appearance suggested invincibility, but the truth was that his health was heavily compromised. By the mid-1990s, his reliance on performance-enhancing drugs and diuretics had severely damaged his organs. Münzer tragically died in 1996 at the age of just 31 due to multiple organ failure linked to extreme bodybuilding practices. His story is a stark reminder of how the image of a terrifying bodybuilder does not equal fighting skill, and in his case, it masked a fragile physical condition beneath the surface. Dallas McCarver was one of the most promising young stars in bodybuilding during the mid-2000s. Standing over 6 feet tall and weighing nearly 300 pounds on stage, his massive frame and youthful strength made him appear unstoppable. Among fans and within the bodybuilding community, there was a sense that someone of his size could easily hold his own in any physical confrontation. His intimidating presence often fueled the assumption that he could fight if pushed. The reality was different. McCarver never trained in martial arts, boxing, or any combat discipline. His career was entirely focused on lifting, eating, and growing into one of the sport's next great champions. While his muscles created the illusion of invincibility, they were not backed by the conditioning or skills needed for fighting. Like many other mass monsters, his cardiovascular endurance was limited, and his body was built for stage performance, not combat. Tragically, McCarver's life ended in 2017 at just 26 years old after he collapsed and died from cardiac issues linked to his extreme bodybuilding lifestyle. His story highlights how the perception of fighting power that comes with massive size can be misleading, and how the pursuit of mass often comes at a deadly cost. Craig Titus was a professional bodybuilder who became infamous not for his physique, but for his criminal actions and violent reputation. In the 1990s and early 2000s, Titus was a competitive IFBB pro known for his muscular build and aggressive personality. Outside of bodybuilding, however, he developed a reputation for being hot-headed, confrontational, and dangerous. He often portrayed himself as someone who could fight, leaning on his size and intimidating presence to bolster that image. Unlike many bodybuilders who were only rumored to brawl, Titus's life spiraled into actual violence. He was arrested multiple times for assault and drug-related incidents before his most notorious crime in 2005, when he and his then-girlfriend Kelly Ryan were convicted in connection with the murder of Melissa James. This event ended his bodybuilding career and cemented his place in the sport's dark history. While not a trained fighter, Titus's aggressive behavior made him seem like the kind of bodybuilder who believed his muscle mass guaranteed fighting ability. In reality, his legacy became a tragic cautionary tale, showing how unchecked aggression, poor judgment, and reliance on intimidation can destroy lives inside and outside the bodybuilding world. Markus Rühl, the German mass monster of the late 1990s and early 2000s, was one of the freakiest bodybuilders to ever step on stage. At over 330 pounds in contest shape with a blocky granite-like build, Rühl was often described as looking like a human tank. His sheer size and aggressive training style gave rise to the belief that he could bulldoze anyone in a physical fight. Fans and peers alike often joked or even believed that his physique alone made him a natural fighter. But in reality, Markus had no fighting background. Known for his humor and blunt personality, reality, he often laughed off the idea of fighting, admitting that his mobility and conditioning were nowhere near what would be required for combat sports. His enormous size was a disadvantage outside of bodybuilding, limiting his endurance and agility. While his looks created an aura of menace, Rule never pursued altercations seriously. His reputation for fighting ability was entirely myth built around his intimidating appearance. Marcus Rule's case reinforces the theme. Bodybuilding physiques can look terrifying, but when it comes to actual combat, size without skill usually collapses under pressure. Tito Raymond, though not as massive as some of the other bodybuilders on this list, built a name for himself in the 1990s and early 2000s as a respected IFBB professional with a well-balanced physique. Unlike mass monsters, his build was lean, athletic, and marketable, which gave him a reputation that extended beyond the bodybuilding stage. With his confident personality and fit appearance, many assumed he had the toughness and ability to handle himself in a fight if challenged. However, like many bodybuilders, this perception was rooted in illusion rather than reality. Raymond never pursued martial arts, boxing, or combat sports training, and his career was entirely focused on physique competition. His reputation for being able to fight came largely from his confident attitude, stage presence, and the common assumption that anyone with muscle must also have fighting ability. What makes Raymond's case notable is how different his image was from the stereotypical delusional mass monster. His look was more functional and athletic, but even then, without combat training, the reality was the same. Bodybuilding strength and aesthetics do not automatically equal fighting skill. Tito Raymond illustrates how even balanced physiques can contribute to the myth of bodybuilders as natural fighters.